Hey friends, and welcome to Your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. It is Wednesday, January 24th, 2024. How are you doing today? I'm Jer Stays, and today's conversation is with somebody who I frankly adore as an artistic curator, and I also think is going to share with us some great information about Detroit music history. Dan Austin, co-founder of the Motor City Soul Club, at least in this capacity. Dan, always so good to talk to you, man.
Great to talk to you too, Jer.
Absolutely. So, the news hook is that the Motor City Soul Club's Soul Stomp is returning this weekend to the Marble Bar after a very long hiatus. We're going to talk about all of that in a minute. But Dan, you love soul music, stuff from Detroit, all of it. What about this genre captured your attention? Because it's an older genre, but Dan, you're not 75 years old.
I sometimes feel like I am, or at least at the inside. I think that for me, for starters, soul music, regardless of your background, your skin color, your upbringing, I just think that coming from a town like Detroit, soul's in our DNA. So I think we're naturally inclined to gravitate toward this type of music. And then based on the fact that, in my opinion, I'm sure there'll be many, many who will disagree, this level of quality has never been matched. There were studios all over the country and many here in Detroit that were just cranking out just amazing record after amazing record. And, sadly, times change, tastes change, more artists come on the scene. So much of it had been forgotten or never discovered in the first place. And the Motor City Soul Club was started 10 years ago, as hard as that is for me to believe, with the mission of keeping this music alive, turning new people, new audiences onto old records. We always said that the goal was for someone to walk away from one of our events wondering how they had lived their entire lives without hearing at least one of the songs that they heard. We'd often have people come up to us at the Soul Stomp wanting to know who that was because their Shazam or whatever wasn't deciphering this obscure soul cut from 1966 or whatever. Really, that was the mission. And I'll tell you, Jer, as a wise man once said, time keeps on slipping into the future. And as it does, we are starting to lose a lot of these soul legends. It has become ever more important to keep their music and legacy alive, for me personally. One of the advantages of being here in Detroit is that you get to meet some of these artists who recorded some of this amazing music so long ago. They never left Detroit. It's just been every year seems to just bring more loss. And so whatever can be done to keep people's toes tapping to their music so that they live on in our ears, not just in our hearts. That's what the Motor City Soul Club is all about for me.
It's a really amazing thing that you all are doing. And, if somebody's just coming across this for the first time, I think there is this idea that the music legacy of Detroit around this time centers around Motown. And of course, Motown's talked about, and I enjoy Motown, don't get me wrong. And seeing Motown legends over the years, like I recently saw the Fisher Theater production of the Temptations musical. Like, there's so many good stories in that, but there is also, Dan, and I want to expand on this a little bit, there's so much more to the soul and music legacy of Detroit and Michigan than Motown, correct?
Yeah, it goes so far beyond Motown. And actually, I would also note that Motown is so much more vast than just the 100 songs that everybody knows by heart, right? I mean, yes, everybody knows and loves Baby Love or Sir Duke or Superstition or, Reach Out. I mean, those songs are just part of the fabric of America. But for every Four Tops or Temps or Supremes or Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, there were other artists at Motown who recorded music that was also written by Holland Dozier Holland, also arranged by Paul Reiser. Every bit as good, but for whatever reason didn't sell that well. And so it's just not part of that American songbook. So yes, not just there were so many other labels in Detroit besides Motown, but even Motown has so much stuff in the vaults or those forgotten artists that also deserve to be played. And I'm so thrilled to say that at the Motor City Soul Club, we play it all. Not just Detroit, also Chicago and Memphis and California, LA. I mean, like there were artists all over this country producing just incredible music, some of which sounds like it could have been recorded yesterday, especially as we're starting to see this kind of neo soul kind of thing starting to gain popularity. You know, you get all these artists they know how good this material was, so they're sampling it. You know, every time we'll play a record that has been sampled by Jay-Z or in a Beyonce song or whatever, people have their minds blown because they don't realize, oh yeah, I guess that sample, that hook had to come from somewhere. Here in Detroit, Motown being the big one, but also the Rick Tick Studios, legendary. They were so good, such a rival, such a threat to Berry Gordy that Berry Gordy bought him out. You can't beat him, buy him. And that's how artists like Edwin Starr wound up on Motown. I could not even begin to list off all of the artists, all of the great records made in this city that people of this program, listeners of this program, have never heard of. But trust me, there are a lot. And again, I would put the output from that era in this town against any other contemporary or in the past era of music.
I will say, as much as I am a homer, it was amazingly fun to go down to Memphis and check out Stax and STAX, if you're not familiar, and the sound there. And one of the things I really enjoyed about going to Memphis were the statues of musicians everywhere. And if there's something I really hope that Detroit emulates, I mean, the spirit of Detroit is in soul music. So I feel like there should be so much more sharing about this amazing genre and time in our history.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And there really needs to be more attention given to some of these artists, even those who weren't on Motown, you know? Yeah, sure. Jackie Wilson, Aretha Franklin weren't Motown. They were from here, but there were so many others. A good friend of mine, J.J. Barnes, just passed away recently, and he sold a lot of records. Like, I would be living out in Seattle, and I'd find J.J. Barnes records at the record store. I mean, there were so many just incredibly talented artists from this town. And even those who weren't from here but came here because they knew that's where the magic was happening, that Motown sound. How do people find out about this? I mean, there isn't a radio station that plays old 60s and 70s soul and funk here. There's soon won't be a program dedicated to it. So it makes things like the Soul Stomp ever more important so that people can continue to hear this music, hear the legacy, the musical legacy of this town and others in one place. Plus, it makes great dancing music.
Oh, for sure. And look, I've been to this event in the past, and to see people dressed up, people of all ages, all backgrounds come together for the Soul Stomp. It's one of the most beautiful things in this city of Detroit. If somebody, and I know that there are so many to pick from or whatever, but let's say someone's saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to give this stuff a shot. Of course, I know that they're going to go this weekend to the Motor City Soul Club Soul Stomp, but let's say they're listening to this right now and they're like, I want to pop up on whatever service. I know that you want to drop in Northern Soul into YouTube or Mixcloud, but let's get a little bit deeper too. Where are some places to start? Playlists, artists, record labels, things like that.
Man, I mean, there are just so many. I think that two of the artists who were huge back in the day, but for whatever reason, people just stopped listening to them. One of them would be Major Lance. Major Lance was a Chicago artist on OK Records, put out a lot of records, sold a lot of records. He's just been forgotten about. Jackie Wilson being another one of my personal favorites. I'm not as huge into some of the Lonely Teardrops early stuff, but in the late 60s, he put out some real bangers. So those would be two artists who are easily findable on Spotify, YouTube, and the like. Locally, I think that the artists who deserved more praise, attention, stardom, money, the aforementioned J.J. Barnes. J.J. put out so many incredible records. Famously, when Berry Gordy brought out Golden World and Rick Tick, as we talked about earlier, he acquired JJ's contract, and then Berry Gordy wouldn't let him record because he thought he sounded too much like Marvin Gaye. He was a threat. Competition within the label was not allowed, so he just benched him and basically killed JJ's career. But if you search for JJ Barnes, you'll find tons and tons of great material. I would say one of the other things that makes this fandom, this love affair with this type of music, both frustrating but also amazingly fascinating, is that so many of these amazing records were the only records some of these artists put out. You look at an artist like Rose Batiste, who put out only a handful of records, all here in Detroit, but I Miss My Baby and Hit and Run, the two sides of 145, are some of the finest soul music, in my opinion, ever recorded. We also just lost Rose last year. So, it's hard to recommend artists when they had only 2 or 3 records, but I think that you can look for labels, as you mentioned. So Rick Tick, Golden World were 2 Detroit imprints from the same label. They almost always put out great stuff. And that's usually a seal of quality. I think that my other favorite labels, personally, out of Chicago, Brunswick, they put out a lot of great stuff in the 60s. Chess, Cadet, Checker, also out of Chicago. Tons of great soul stuff, not just blues. I love me Howlin' Wolf, but they also had Etta James and the Sugar Pie DeSantos and all sorts of other artists who are definitely worth checking out. Also, I should mention those larger labels. There are many compilations available on Spotify as well. So you could look up Chess, Checker, Soul, or something like that. And the next thing you know, you'll be rocking out to Mitty Collier and some other, rare, obscure soul cut like the Valentinos featuring Bobby Womack. And it's really one of those things where I don't know how anyone could become obsessed with this music and learn all about it without the internet, because you never know what other records exist out there from a certain artist or a certain songwriter or a producer or whatever, if it weren't for Discogs or some of these Northern Soul forums and websites.
You were mentioning about the legacy of these artists, and I'm just going to put this out there in case anyone hears this with my voice or anything like that, because these stories, I think, really need to be captured in one way or another, even if it's, just an audio interview or something. Like, there's so much of Detroit history and that beat that we need to make sure we capture in these next few years, because this is the time. If we're ever going to save this legacy, this is the time to do it and talk to folks and find folks. So I think that's something that would be very good to work on, Dan. I know you've been doing a ton of work over the years with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I started and applied for some grants and things, but one of my good friends was already doing a great job with that. Mike Dukevich started a podcast series called One Record that you can find online, and he has talked with many of these Detroit soul artists, and the concept being is just talking about this one obscure record, the story behind it, a little bit about the artists and the band's careers, but I would highly recommend checking it out. He does an excellent job. But yes, it's a race against time, trying to track these folks down. A lot of them, like Melvin Davis, he didn't have a ton of commercial success despite putting out some amazing records. And, he became a postal worker. J.J. Barnes, I met him because he was a security guard when I was working at the Free Press. And I walked in with some records one day. I had known J.J. for years. He'd been a security guard for years there. And he just asked, "You got any of my records there?" It was one of those, holy cats. "JJ, what's your last name?" He's like, "I'm J.J. Barnes." And you hold these records in such high esteem and think that they're, each one of them a holy grail of just perfection. And many of these Detroit artists, they just still live and walk among us. And sometimes we're none the wiser. It's always fun to walk into a bar and, see Carolyn Crawford sitting there or out on the dance floor. Carolyn's a heck of a dancer. So yeah, that's kind of one of the main worries that I have, is that if this music is not played, if these stories are not recorded, these stories, the music might be lost or forgotten. That keeps me up at night.
The thing is that there's a really fun way to celebrate this, and to, even if you're not as familiar, do not be intimidated to go out and check it out. Let's talk about the Motor City Soul Club. You mentioned you co-founded it 10 years ago. I am really glad to see this kind of come back from the pandemic. What are some of the details that we need to know, other than that it's going to be at the Marble Bar, which, by the way, is really easy to get to right off of the Lodge Freeway near Grand Boulevard if you haven't been. But what are some of the things people need to know?
You don't have to know all of the songs. You would be amazed at just how danceable these songs are. If you have any rhythm, even if you don't have any rhythm.
That's my department.
That's my department too. Yeah, born with no rhythm, but even once you get a drink or two in you, the sound system at Marble Bar is just incredible. It's impossible not to shake your hips even a little bit there. I'm not sure what to expect in terms of crowds. We have not done this since the pandemic started. I really kind of found out about the pandemic when the Marble Bar called me, and we were a couple days out from the Soul Stomp in 2020 there, February, I think it was. And we made the decision like, oh my God, this is real. So I'm not sure what to expect. Back during the peak Motor City Soul Club pre-pandemic, we could have 400 people there. Sometimes we'd have dance floors packed both inside and outside. Marble Bar has 2 stages. So I'm hoping that people come out and enjoy this music. We do have a $5 cover this time, partly because we're not sure how well we're going to do. Before the pandemic, we were always confident that we were going to get a lot of people in there. $5 we feel is pretty fair. That pays for the security guards watching the cars. That pays for the sound guy to make sure that our records are sounding as fine as they possibly can. But I think that one of the things that also makes Soul Club enticing to those who might not have been before is that, trust me when I say you might not know what you're going to hear, but just know that it's going to be amazing. If you love Motown, if you love funk, if you love records, hip hop that sample old soul records, lots of horns, lots of bass, lots of drums. Like if that sounds like something that you would like to shake your tail feather to, you're going to have a good time. And doors are at 9. We'll start, certainly before 10 o'clock, but if we start getting a pretty decent crowd before then, we'll start then. I expect this to be my last Soul Stomp, so trust me when I say I want to play as many of those little 7-inch round mounds of wax as I possibly can on Saturday.
Yeah, I was going to bridge into that because it's a little, as a longtime fan, it's a little heartbreaking. I understand, it's got to be an emotional thing for you, but also to be clear, this is continuing on, right? This isn't ending here. This is just a chapter.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, the Motor City Soul Club has never been about me. It's always been about the music. I would frame this event as a welcome back for the Soul Club. My co-founder, Brad Hale, who owns People's Records there on Gratiot, he wants to keep it going with some of our friends. It's just a goodbye for me. And it's absolutely kind of heartbreaking. My heart, my ears, my mind, they all say you want to keep this thing going, but my health has not been good. And so my body is saying, sit your ass down. So yeah, it's really hard. Yeah, it's hard. But I have my hand in many Detroit pursuits, and I want to make sure that I can keep doing some of the other things that I love as a service to the city that I love. So HistoricDetroit.org will keep on carrying on, and the Soul Club will keep on carrying on just without me. I wanted to do at least one more. I didn't want to go out with this being the whimper. It's been 4 years since we've been able to do this proper, and I just wanted to get one more taste of the Soul Stomp magic.
100%. And it's something I encourage people to check out. It will be this Saturday at the Marble Bar. Go check it out. Be there or be square, I guess, as they would say, right?
Back in the day.
Yeah. Back in the day.
Yeah.
Dan Austin, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Thank you for sharing with us so much. You mentioned your other projects too, historicdetroit.org. Thank you for sharing when it comes to this music and where to get people started. And, I'm sure we'll talk again soon, Dan. It's always good to catch up with you.
Always a pleasure, Jer. Thanks so much.
And I will, friends, put a link in the show notes to it over on Facebook for the event, and go check it out. And that's it for today's show. Don't forget 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you want to join us. All right, that is it for today. I am Jer Stays. Thank you so much to our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit for keeping this thing going. Norris Howard joins me tomorrow. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll talk soon.